The axe came down hard against the log, splitting it clean through. David Walsh wiped sweat from his forehead and reached for another piece of wood. His hands shook slightly, like they always did in the mornings. The pile of firewood beside his cabin had grown large enough to last 3 winters, but he kept chopping anyway. It was better than sitting still, better than thinking. New Haven stretched out below his hillside cabin, a collection of prefab buildings and hopeful gardens that humans had planted on this frontier world. Most folks down there were like him, retired soldiers looking for peace after the frontier wars ended. They nodded at him in the settlement, but never invited him for meals. David preferred it that way. Crowds made his chest tight. He was stacking the fresh wood when he heard voices drifting up from the main road. A group of settlers stood around someone's transport vehicle, their voices carrying that particular edge that meant trouble. David hesitated, then walked down to see what the fuss was about. Dragon hunters came through last night. Old Peter was saying, his weathered face tight with approval. Found a nest up in the Red Cliffs. Cleared out proper. David's stomach turned. He knew what cleared out meant. The Galactic Council had declared star dragons dangerous predators 2 years ago, offering bounties for their elimination. Most settlers supported it after losing livestock to the massive creatures. Good riddance, someone else said. Those things are monsters. David turned away without commenting. He had seen real monsters during the war, and they did not have scales or wings. He started back toward his cabin, but something pulled at him. Maybe it was the military training that never quite left his bones, or maybe it was the strange ache in his chest that had nothing to do with his old injuries. Either way, his feet carried him toward the Red Cliffs instead of home. The climb took 2 hours. David's legs burned by the time he reached the plateau where the cliffs rose like broken teeth against the sky. He smelled the destruction before he saw it. Burned vegetation, scorched rock, the chemical stink of plasma weapons. The nest had been built in a sheltered cave, carefully arranged with soft grasses and warm stones. Now it lay in ruins. 3 adult dragon bodies sprawled across the rocks, their beautiful scales dull in death. David had never seen star dragons up close before. They were magnificent even like this, each one the size of a small transport vehicle, with wings that would have spanned twice that he should have left then. Should have gone back to his quiet cabin and his endless woodpile. But his eyes caught movement in the destroyed nest. A tremor ran through a pile of shattered eggshells. David approached slowly, his heart hammering. Beneath the largest shell fragment, something glowed faintly with inner warmth. An egg, intact, roughly the size of his torso, with a surface that shimmered like oil on water. They missed one, he whispered. The egg pulsed with light, as if responding to his voice. Every logical part of David's brain screamed at him to walk away. Harboring a dragon was illegal. The hunters would return to check their work. The settlement would exile him at best, turn him in at worst. He had enough problems without adding this to the pile, but his hands were already moving, carefully gathering the egg against his chest. It was warm, almost hot, and he could feel something moving inside. A life that had already lost everything. Just like he had 5 years ago in that ambush that took his entire unit. I must be losing my mind, David muttered, but he wrapped the egg in his jacket anyway. The trek back to his cabin took longer with the precious cargo. David kept to the forest trails, avoiding the main paths. By the time he reached home, the suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. He set the egg on his bed, surrounded by blankets to keep it warm. Then he sat in his old chair and stared at it, wondering what the hell he had just done. His service pistol hung on the wall, next to the medals he never looked at. Photos of his unit gathered dust on the shelf. This cabin had been a tomb for 5 years, a place where he waited for time to pass. Now there was an egg glowing softly in his bed, and David felt something he had not experienced in a long time. It was not quite hope, more like purpose. Or maybe just the stubborn human instinct to protect something small and helpless. The egg shifted, rocking slightly. A thin crack appeared along its surface. Not yet, David said softly. Not yet. I am not ready. But the crack spread anyway, glowing brighter. From inside came a sound, faint and melodic. It reminded David of wind chimes, or maybe a song he had forgotten. His hand stopped shaking for the first time all day. He pulled his chair closer to the bed and settled in a wait. Whatever was coming, whatever happened next, he would face it. The Frontier Wars had taught him many things, and one of them was this. Sometimes you did not choose your battles. Sometimes they chose you. The egg rocked again, and David Walsh, haunted veteran of New Haven Colony, waited for the life inside to break free. David jerked awake in his chair, heart pounding, the nightmare still clinging to his mind like smoke. In his dream, he had been back in the canyon, watching his unit die one by one while he lay pinned under debris, helpless and screaming. The same dream that had haunted him for 5 years. But something was different this time. A sound had pulled him out of it. Not an explosion or a scream, but something else. Something new. Crying teeth blinked in the darkness of his cabin, orienting himself. The egg. He had fallen asleep watching the egg. But now the blankets on his bed were moving, and that sound, that heartbreaking melodic crying, filled the room. David fumbled for the light switch. Warm yellow illumination flooded the cabin, and he saw her. The egg had hatched while he slept. Shell fragments lay scattered across the blankets, still glowing faintly. And in the center, no bigger than a house cat, crouched a baby dragon. She was the most beautiful thing David had ever seen. Her scales were silver blue, catching the light like moonlight on water. 2 small wings, translucent and delicate, pressed tight against her body. Her eyes were huge and golden, filled with tears that sparkled as they fell, and she was terrified. The baby dragon pressed herself into the corner of the bed, as far from David as she could get, crying that same haunting melody. He could see her whole body trembling. "Hey," David said softly, not moving from his chair. "Hey, it is okay." She cried harder, her small body shaking with sobs. The sound cut through David like a blade. He had heard a lot of terrible sounds in his life, but this was different. This was pure, innocent fear that David's military training kicked in before he even realized it. He recognized trauma response when he saw it. This little creature had felt her mother die, had been alone in that egg while hunters destroyed her entire family. Now, she was in a strange place with a strange creature looming over her. "Okay," David said, keeping his voice low and steady. "I'm going to move now. Just backing up. See? I'm not going to hurt you." He stood slowly and moved to the other side of the room, putting as much distance between them as possible. Then he sat on the floor with his back against the wall, making himself small and unthreatening. The crying continued, but softer now. The baby dragon watched him with those enormous golden eyes, ready to bolt if he moved wrong. "You must be hungry," David said. "Let me think. What do dragons eat?" He had no idea. Slowly, telegraphing every movement, he stood and moved to his small kitchen area. The dragon's crying intensified when he moved, so he kept talking in that same calm voice he had once used with frightened civilians during the war. "I've got some dried meat here, and some fruit. Not sure which one you would like." He placed small portions of food on a plate and set it on the floor, then retreated to his wall again. The baby dragon watched him, but did not move toward the food. Her crying quieted to small hiccuping sounds that broke his heart. They stayed like that for hours. David sitting against the wall, speaking softly every now and then. The dragon curled in her corner, watching him with frightened eyes. Outside, the suns rose and morning light crept through the window. "I'm going to call you Star," David said eventually, "because that is what your kind is called. Star dragons. Is that okay?" The baby dragon blinked at him. Her crying had stopped, though she still trembled. "I know you were scared," David continued. "I get scared too. Every night, actually. I have bad dreams about things that happened a long time ago. About people I could not save." Star tilted her head slightly, still watching him. "But I'm going to keep you safe," David said, surprised by the conviction in his own voice. "I do not know how yet, but I will. That is a promise." The day passed slowly. David moved only when necessary, always slowly, always talking. He ate his own meals sitting against the wall. When he needed to use the bathroom, he announced it first and moved carefully. Star watched his every move, but never approached the food. Night came again. David's body ached from sitting on the hard floor, but he did not move to his bed. That was Star's space now. Instead, he grabbed a blanket and prepared to sleep against the wall. That was when Star made her first sound beyond crying. A small chirp, curious and uncertain. David looked over. Star had crept to the edge of the bed. She was looking at the plate of food he had left, then back at him. "Go ahead," he said gently. "It is yours." Star stretched her neck down, sniffed the dried meat, and took a tiny bite. Then another. She ate quickly, desperately, like she had been starving. When the plate was empty, she looked at David again and made another chirping sound. "More? Okay, just a moment." David prepared another small plate and set it down. This time, Star climbed off the bed and approached it, though she kept one eye on him the whole time. She ate this portion more slowly. When she finished, she sat there for a moment, looking at David. Then, in a movement that shocked him completely, she took 3 tentative steps toward him. David held his breath. Star came closer, her small clawed feet clicking softly on the floor. She stopped just out of arm's reach and sat down, watching him with those incredible golden eyes. "Hey there," David whispered. Star chirped again. Then, so slowly that David barely dared to breathe, she moved closer and pressed her small body against his outstretched hand. She was warm, almost hot, and her scales felt like smooth stones. David could feel her heartbeat racing like a small drum. He held perfectly still as Star curled up against his hand, her wings folding carefully against her sides. Within moments, she was asleep. David sat there, his hand going numb, his back screaming in protest, but he did not move. This tiny creature, who had every reason to fear and hate, had chosen to trust him. Something in his chest, something that had been frozen for 5 years, cracked open just a little. For the first time since the ambush, David Walsh felt like he might have a reason to face tomorrow. 3 weeks had changed everything and nothing at all. David stood in his kitchen, preparing breakfast while Star dozed on the rug near the fireplace. She had grown to the size of a large dog now, her silver blue scales gleaming in the morning light. The cabin felt smaller with her in it, but also more alive, more like a home than a hiding place. "Eggs?" David asked, and Star's head popped up immediately. She chirped twice, which David had learned meant yes. He scrambled the eggs and split them between 2 plates. Star padded over to the table, now comfortable enough to eat beside him rather than in a corner. She still startled at sudden noises, and sometimes David caught her staring at the door like she expected hunters to burst through. But mostly, she seemed content. What surprised David most was how she affected his nightmares. They still came, vivid and terrible, pulling him back to that canyon where his unit died. But now, when he woke up gasping and shaking, Star was always there. She would press against his side, warm and solid, and make a low humming sound that somehow calmed the panic in his chest. It worked both ways. 2 nights ago, Star had woken crying from her own nightmare. David had held her while she trembled, feeling through some connection he did not understand the memory of her mother's death. He had whispered to her until the crying stopped, until she fell back asleep with her head in his lap. "We are quite a pair," David said, watching Star demolish her eggs. 2 broken souls hiding from the world. Star looked up at him, and David swore he saw understanding in those golden eyes. Sometimes he wondered if she could sense his emotions. There were moments when she seemed to react to his feelings before he even fully processed them himself, but a knock at the door made them both freeze. David's hand instinctively went to the pistol at his hip. Star's scales rippled, small spines rising along her back in a defensive reflex she had only recently developed. "David? You in there?" The voice was familiar. Robert Shun, one of the few people from the settlement who still tried to be friendly. David looked at Star and pointed to the back room. They had practiced this. Star moved quickly and quietly, disappearing into the small storage space David had converted into a hiding spot. He closed the door most of the way, leaving just a crack so she could breathe easily. Then he opened the front door. Robert stood on the porch, a broad-shouldered man with gray hair and laugh lines around his eyes. They had served in different units during the war, but had ended up in New Haven around the same time. Robert had adapted better, found a wife, built a life. He looked at David now with concern. "Morning," Robert said. "Mind if I come in?" "Sure." David stepped aside, hyper-aware of Star's empty food plate still on the table. He casually moved it to the sink. Robert settled into a chair and studied David carefully. "You look different." "Different how?" "Better. Healthier. You have been taking care of the place." Robert gestured around the cabin. He was right. David had cleaned properly for the first time in years, fixed a broken window, even organized his shelves. "What changed?" "Just felt like time to stop living like a hermit," David said, keeping his voice neutral. Robert nodded slowly. "Good. That is real good, David. But I came to warn you about something. Professional dragon hunters arrived in New Haven yesterday. Not the local bounty types. Real professionals with corporate backing and military-grade equipment." David's blood went cold. "Why?" "Their scanners picked up traces of dragon DNA in this region. They think there might be survivors from that nest they cleared out last month." Robert leaned forward. "David, they have authorization from the Galactic Council to search private property. They will be sweeping the area over the next few days." From a back room, David heard a small sound. Just a tiny chirp, quickly stifled. Robert's eyes flickered toward the door, but he did not comment. "I will keep an eye out," David said carefully. Robert stood, but he hesitated at the door. "You know you could trust me, right? If you ever needed help with anything." Their eyes met, and David saw that Robert knew, or at least suspected. "I know," David said quietly. "Thank you for the warning." After Robert left, David let Star out of the back room. She pressed against his legs, sensing his fear. "It is okay," he said, but his hand was shaking again. "We just need to be careful." That night, David could not sleep. He sat in his chair, watching Star sleep peacefully on her rug, and tried to think. Running was not an option. These hunters would have tracking equipment, satellite coverage, probably drones. They would find Star within days that he could turn her in. The thought made him sick, but he forced himself to consider it. Star would be killed or locked in some research facility. Either way, she would suffer, and David would be alone again, with nothing but his nightmares and his guilt. That was not happening. Around midnight, Star woke up. But this time, something was wrong. She stood up slowly, her body rigid, and then she started crying. Not the frightened crying from when she first hatched, but something deeper and more anguished. David rushed to her side. "What is wrong? What is it?" Star's crying intensified. Her eyes were open but unfocused, like she was seeing something that was not there. David realized with a chill that she was having a nightmare while awake, trapped in some terrible memory. He knelt beside her and placed his hands on her scales. "Star, I am here. You are safe. Come back." But she kept crying, her whole body shaking. And then, impossibly, David heard words, not spoken aloud, but in his mind, carried on the melody of her crying. "Please chase my monsters away." The words hit David like a physical blow. They were not just sounds. They were a plea, a desperate cry from a child who had seen too much horror. Just like the cries he had ignored from his unit in that canyon, the calls for help he could not answer because he was pinned and broken. "I am here," David said fiercely, pulling Star close despite her spines. "I am here, and I am not leaving. Your monsters are my monsters now. We will face them together." Star's crying began to quiet. Her eyes focused on David's face. "Together," David repeated. "You hear me? I failed my unit. I let them die while I hid under debris and did nothing. But I will not fail you. These hunters want to hurt you? They will have to go through me first." Star made a soft sound and pressed her head against David's chest. He held her, feeling her heartbeat slow to normal, feeling his own fear transform into something else. Something harder, more determined, that he had spent 5 years running from his trauma, hiding in this cabin, chopping wood to avoid thinking. But Star needed him. She had chosen to trust him despite every reason not to. And David Walsh, broken veteran with shaking hands and endless nightmares, was not going to let her down. When dawn came, David was still holding Star, but his mind was clear. The hunters were coming. Fine, let them come. He had training, experience, and something he had not felt in 5 years. He had something worth protecting. The hunters arrived on a gray morning when the fog still clung to the valley. David watched them from his window. 6 figures in tactical gear, moving with professional precision through the forest below his cabin. Their leader was a tall centurion, his 4 arms carrying an impressive array of scanning equipment. David recognized military movement patterns when he saw them. These were not amateurs. Star pressed against his leg, her scales rippling with anxiety. She had grown even larger over the past week, now the size of small pony, but she was still just a child. David rested his hand on her head. "Stay quiet," he whispered, "just like we practiced." He had spent the last 3 days preparing. The cabin looked normal from the outside, but David had built a false panel in the back room, creating a space just large enough for Star to hide. He had lined it with materials that might block scanning equipment, though he had no way to test if it would actually work. The knock came firm and authoritative. David took a breath, gave Star one last look, and went to answer. She slipped into the back room without a sound. The Centaurian stood on his porch, flanked by 2 human hunters. Up close, David could see the expensive gear, the confident stance of people who had never failed a hunt. "David Walsh." The Centaurian's voice was smooth, professional. "I am Krell. My team is conducting a sweep of this area under Galactic Council authorization. We have detected dragon DNA signatures near your property." "Have not seen any dragons," David said, keeping his voice flat that Krell's upper arms held a tablet displaying scanning data. "Our equipment indicates otherwise. I'm sure you understand we need to verify. Standard procedure. You have a warrant. The Galactic Council authorization supersedes local warrant requirements." Krell's smile did not reach his eyes. "We can do this the easy way, Mr. Walsh. A quick scan of your property, and we will be gone." David's mind raced. If he refused, they would force entry anyway, and it would make him look guilty. If he allowed them in, they might find Star despite his precautions. "Fine," he said finally, "but I want to see this authorization." Krell handed over the tablet. David made a show of reading it carefully, buying time. The document looked legitimate, stamped with official seals. But there, buried in the legal language, he spotted something. "This says you're authorized to search for adult dragons engaged in predatory behavior," David said slowly. "It says nothing about juveniles or non-threatening specimens." One of the human hunters shifted uncomfortably. Krell's expression hardened. "Any dragon is considered a threat under council guidelines. Not according to this document." David handed back the tablet. "You want to search my property for adult predators? Fine, but this does not give you blanket authority to confiscate whatever you find." "Are you saying there is something to find, Mr. Walsh?" David met Krell's eyes steadily. "I am saying you should follow the terms of your own authorization." For a long moment, they stared at each other. Then Krell gestured to his team. "Search the perimeter. If you detect anything, call me immediately." The hunters spread out, their scanners humming. David stood on his porch, forcing himself to appear calm while his heart hammered. Inside the cabin, hidden behind false panels, Star waited in silence. An hour passed. The hunters circled the cabin, scanning every meter. One of them approached the back wall, right where Star was hidden. David watched the scanner readings spike on the hunter's equipment. "Krell," the hunter called. "I've got something." David's hand moved to his pistol, hidden under his jacket. If they found her, if they tried to take her, he would do whatever it took. Krell strode over, studying the readings. Concentrated DNA signature. Recent activity. He looked at David. "You mind if we check inside that wall?" "I do mind, actually. That is where I store personal items. Va memorabilia. Some of it is classified." It was a lie, but a believable one. Former military personnel often kept sensitive materials. Krell hesitated. "We have authorization." "For adult predators," David repeated. "Not for violating privacy laws regarding classified military storage." "You want to open that wall? You go get a specific warrant." Krell's 4 hands clenched with frustration. He knew David was using legal technicalities, but he also knew that pushing too hard could create complications. The Galactic Council did not like hunters who caused diplomatic incidents. "We will be watching this property," Krell said finally. "If you're hiding something, we will find it. Looking forward to it." After they left, David waited a full hour before letting Star out. She emerged trembling, and he held her close while she cried softly against his shoulder. "You did so well," he whispered. "So brave. So quiet." But David knew this was just the beginning. Krell had placed surveillance equipment around the perimeter. David had spotted at least 3 cameras and 2 motion sensors. The hunters were not giving up. They were just changing tactics. That night, David sat at a small table with an old military notebook and began planning. He drew maps of the surrounding forest, marked escape routes, identified defensive positions. His military training came back like muscle memory, patterns and strategies he had tried to forget. Star watched him work, her golden eyes reflecting the lamplight. "I am not running," David told her, "and I'm not giving you up. But we need to be ready. They're going to come back, and next time they will not ask permission." He worked through the night, planning for scenarios. If they attacked from the east, if they brought drones, if they tried a night assault. For each possibility, David plotted a response. Some part of him recognized that he was preparing for war, and that should have scared him. 5 years ago, the thought of combat would have sent him into a panic attack. But now, with Star depending on him, David felt something different. Not fearlessness. He was still terrified. His hands still shook when he thought about the fighting to come. But beneath the fear was determination. A core of steel that had been there all along, buried under trauma and guilt. Star made a questioning sound. David looked up from his notes. "I am scared," he admitted. "Scared of fighting. Scared of failing. Scared of losing you like I lost my unit." His voice cracked. "But I am more scared of not trying. Of hiding while someone I care about gets hurt." Star moved closer, pressing her warm scales against his side. Through their connection, David felt her trust, her faith that he would protect her. It was terrifying and humbling in equal measure. "Okay," David said quietly. "Okay, we do this together." 3 days later, Krell returned with a warrant. A real one this time, properly authorized. David saw them coming and knew the time for legal maneuvers was over. He strapped on his old combat vest, checked his weapons, and looked at Star. "Time to run," he said. "You ready?" Star's eyes blazed with determination. She was scared, but she trusted him. David opened the back door where his emergency pack waited. The forest stretched out behind his cabin, thick and dark. Somewhere out there, he had prepared positions, supplies, traps. Everything he needed to keep Star safe for as long as possible. The hunters reached his front door. David heard Krell announce their authority to enter. "Let us go," David whispered to Star. Together, they slipped into the forest as the hunters breached the cabin behind them. The forest swallowed them whole. David moved through the undergrowth with Star close behind, following paths he had scouted over the past week. Behind them, he heard shouts as the hunters discovered the empty cabin. They would be coming soon, armed and equipped with tracking technology David could barely imagine. His breath came fast, too fast. The forest around him started to blur. No, not now. Not the flashbacks. Not when Star needed him focused. But his mind was already slipping. The sounds of pursuit became weapons fire. The trees transformed into canyon walls. He was back there, pinned under debris, listening to his unit die while he did nothing. Star's warm body pressed against his leg, and he felt her fear spike. She sensed his panic. David forced himself to breathe, to count like the therapist had taught him years ago before he stopped going to sessions. 1, 2, 3. "I am okay," he whispered, more to convince himself than Star. "Keep moving." They reached the first cache David had prepared, hidden in a hollow tree. Inside was water, medical supplies, ammunition. David let Star drink while he checked his pistol. 6 hunters with military-grade equipment against 1 traumatized veteran and a baby dragon. The odds were terrible. A drone buzzed overhead. David pulled Star deeper into the thick canopy, cursing silently. They were mapping the area, hurting him. He knew these tactics. He had used them himself during the war. "This way," he said, leading Star toward rougher terrain where the drones would have trouble following. They climbed through rocky outcroppings as the suns climbed higher. Sweat soaked David's shirt. Star was breathing hard, not used to this kind of exertion. She stumbled on loose rocks, and David caught her, feeling how her scales had grown warmer. She was overheating. Rest, he said, finding a sheltered spot between two large boulders. Just for a moment. Star collapsed gratefully. David kept watch, his pistol ready. In the distance, he could see movement through the trees. The hunters were spreading out, systematic and patient. They knew he could not run forever. The memories came again, stronger this time. The ambush, the screaming, the terrible moment when he realized he could not save them. David's hands began to shake, the pistol wavering. Star made a small sound. Not crying, but a low humming that vibrated through David's chest. The same sound she made when comforting him from nightmares. She was trying to help, even though she was exhausted and scared. "I am supposed to be protecting you," David said, his voice breaking. Star pressed her head against his hand. Through their connection, he felt her emotions. Fear, yes, but also trust. She believed in him even when he did not believe in himself. A twig snapped nearby. David spun, pistol raised. One of the human hunters emerged from the trees, rifle ready. For a frozen moment, they stared at each other. "Krell," the hunter said into his calm, "I have got them." Grid Section 7. David did not hesitate. He fired twice, hitting the hunter's rifle and comm unit. The hunter dove for cover, returning fire. Plasma bolts scorched the rocks above David's head. "Run!" David shouted to Star. They bolted deeper into the forest. More hunters were coming now, drawn by the sound of weapons fire. David's tactical training warred with his panic. He knew he should set an ambush, use the terrain, think strategically. But all he could think about was his unit dying while he hid. Star cried out as a plasma bolt passed close to her wing. The sound snapped something in David. His vision tunneled. He was back in the canyon, watching his people fall, unable to help. Except this time, he could help. He could fight. David spun and fired at the pursuing hunter, driving them into cover. He grabbed a flashbang from his vest, one of the few pieces of military equipment he had kept. Threw it hard. The forest lit up with blinding light and sound. In the confusion, David led Star down a steep slope toward a narrow canyon. He had scouted this area. The hunters would have to funnel through a choke point. It was the same kind of terrain where his unit had died, but David knew how to use it now. Knew how to turn a trap into an advantage. They reached the canyon floor. David positioned Star behind a large rock, then took up position with a clear view of the approach. His hands were still shaking, but he forced them steady. Focus. Breathe. Protect. The hunters came carefully, weapons ready. 3 of them entering the canyon, scanning for traps. David let them get halfway through before he fired. Not to kill, but to disable. He hit scanners, communication devices, weapons. Military precision cutting through panic. One hunter went down with a shot to his knee. Another's weapon exploded as David's bullet found its power cell. The third dove behind rocks, pinned. Krell's voice echoed through the canyon. "Stand down, Walsh. You are only making this worse." David did not answer. He was watching the canyon rim, where he knew the other hunters would be positioning for a flanking shot. Sure enough, movement. He fired twice more, forcing them back, but his ammunition was running low. And the hunters had backup, resources, time. David had only desperation. Star's cry cut through his concentration. Not a cry of fear, but of pain. David turned and saw her scales rippling, small cracks of light appearing between them. She was changing, growing, responding to the danger. But too fast. It was hurting her. "No, no. Please," David whispered, abandoning his position to go to her. "Star, hold on." She looked at him with those golden eyes, and David felt her terror. Not of the hunters, of herself, of this transformation she could not control. More weapons fire. A plasma bolt hit close enough that David felt the heat. The hunters were advancing, sensing weakness. David crouched over Star, sheltering her with his own body. This was it, the moment from his nightmares. The moment he failed to protect someone who trusted him. Except Star was not dying. She was changing. Light burst from her scales, bright enough to blind. David felt heat like standing next to his son. When his vision cleared, Star had grown to twice her previous size. The small spines along her back had become proper defensive ridges. Her scales had hardened into something like armor, and she was angry that Star's roar shook the canyon. It was not the cry of a baby anymore, but something primal and fierce. The hunters fell back, their weapons lowering in shock, but David saw what they did not. Star was terrified of her own power, trembling despite her new size. She looked at him with desperate eyes, and he heard her voice in his mind again. Please, chase them away. Chase my monsters. She was not asking him to fight the hunters. She was asking him to fight her fear, to help her face this transformation. David stood, placing himself between Star and the hunters. His pistol was nearly empty. His body ached. The memories still clawed at his mind, trying to pull him back to that canyon where he failed. But Star needed him, and David Walsh was done running from his darkness. Together, he said to Star, feeling her presence in his mind. We chased them away together. The hunters advanced. David raised his pistol for what might be his last stand. And beside him, Star prepared to face her first real fight. David's last bullet hit Krell's scanner, shattering it into sparks. The Centaurian snarled and raised his rifle, but Star moved faster than David had ever seen her move. She lunged forward, her new size and strength catching everyone by surprise. Her tail swept two hunters off their feet. Her wings, now large enough to actually lift her small body, created a gust that scattered equipment and kicked up dust. But David could feel through their connection that she was not attacking to hurt. She was defending, protecting, just like he had taught her. Star to me, David called. She retreated to his side immediately, trusting his command. David's military training took over, the panic pushed down by years of combat experience. He saw the tactical situation clearly now. The hunters were regrouping, but they were rattled. They had expected a helpless baby dragon, not this. Krell aimed at Star, and David's empty pistol was suddenly useless. But before Krell could fire, a plasma bolt came from above, striking the rock near the Centaurian's feet. Hold your fire. Robert's voice rang out from the canyon rim. All of you, weapons down now. David looked up in shock. Robert stood on the ridge with a dozen settlers, all armed. Behind them, impossibly, were three members of the New Haven security force. This hunt is over, Robert announced, climbing down into the canyon. We have been in contact with the Galactic Council inspector. Your authorization was fraudulent, Krell. That is a lie, Krell spat. No, it is not. A new voice joined them. An elderly Terran woman in official council robes descended via a small transport drone. I am Inspector Williams. I have been investigating your operation for weeks, Krell. You have been falsifying authorizations, hunting protected specimens, and selling dragon DNA on black markets. David's mind struggled to process what was happening. Star pressed against him, still trembling from her transformation. The baby dragon is no threat, Robert said, looking at David. You called me, remember? 4 days ago, when you knew the hunters were coming. You asked me to contact someone who could help. David blinked. He had made that call in desperation, not believing anything would come of it. He had been preparing to fight and die to protect Star, convinced there was no other way. Inspector Williams approached slowly, her hands visible and empty. May I see the dragon? David's instinct was to refuse, but Star made a small, curious sound. She stepped forward cautiously, and the inspector smiled. Remarkable, Williams said softly. This is one of the star dragon young from the Red Cliff nest? Yes? We received reports that all eggs were destroyed. They missed one, David said, his voice rough. And you saved her, fed her, protected her. Williams looked at David with something like respect. Star dragons are not predators, Mr. Walsh. They are highly intelligent, empathic creatures. The council classified them incorrectly based on falsified reports from hunters who wanted to profit from their extinction. She pulled out a tablet, showing David official documents. New classifications. Protection orders. Star dragons were now listed as an endangered sentient species. Hunting them was illegal. Harming them carried serious penalties. This cannot be real, David whispered. It is very real, and it happened because of you. Williams gestured to Krell and his team. When Robert contacted my office about your situation, we accelerated our investigation. Krell's false authorization gave us the evidence we needed to move publicly. Krell and his hunters were being surrounded by settlement security. The Centaurian's 4 arms were raised in reluctant surrender, his expression twisted with rage. David sank to his knees, the adrenaline leaving his body all at once. Star immediately pressed against him, concerned. He wrapped his arms around her, feeling her solid presence, her warmth. "You are safe," he whispered. "We are both safe." Inspector Williams knelt beside them. "Mr. Walsh, the Council would like to offer you official guardianship of this dragon. She has bonded with you, and separating you now would cause harm to you both. Are you willing to accept this responsibility?" David looked into Star's golden eyes. She looked back, and he felt her emotions through their connection. Trust, affection, hope. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I will protect her." "Then it is done." Williams stood and addressed the gathered crowd. "This property is now registered as a protected sanctuary. Anyone attempting to harm this dragon will face council prosecution." The next hours passed in a blur. Official documents were signed. Krell and his team were taken into custody. Settlers who had come to help congratulated David awkwardly, clearly unsure what to make of the situation. As the sun set, David and Star finally returned to the cabin. It was a mess from the hunter's search, but it was home. David started cleaning while Star curled up in her usual spot by the fireplace, exhausted from the day's events. "We did it," David said, sitting beside her. "We actually survived." Star made a soft humming sound, the one that meant contentment. David stroked her scales, marveling at how much she had grown. She was the size of a large pony now, and she would keep growing. Someday she would be as large as her mother had been, but she would always be the scared baby who had trusted a broken veteran. That night, David's nightmares came as they always did. The canyon, the ambush, his unit dying while he lay helpless. But this time, something was different. In the dream, when the explosions came and the screaming started, David stood up. He fought back. He saved them that it was just a dream, a fantasy. In reality, his unit was gone and nothing could change that. But when David woke, Star was there. She was looking at him with those wise golden eyes, and he felt her understanding. She had nightmares too. She had lost her family too. But they had found each other in their darkness. "We chased the monsters away together," David whispered, repeating the promise he had made. "That is what we do." Star hummed in agreement. Over the following weeks, more changes came. Inspector Williams arranged for the cabin to become an official sanctuary and research station. Scientists wanted to study star dragons, to understand them. David agreed, as long as Star was never treated as a specimen, but as a person. Robert visited often, bringing his wife and children. Other settlers began to stop by, curious about the dragon. Some were former soldiers like David, drawn by something they recognized in his story. The need to protect, the struggle with trauma. The search for purpose. One veteran, a woman named Patricia who had lost her legs in the war, asked if she could volunteer at the sanctuary. Then another came, and another. Soon David's lonely cabin had become a community of broken people finding healing through caring for Star. Star thrived. She grew larger and stronger, her intelligence becoming more obvious every day. She learned to understand human speech, though she could not speak it. Instead, she communicated through her telepathic connection with David, and increasingly with others who spent time with her. 6 months after that desperate chase through the forest, David stood on his porch watching Star play with a group of children from the settlement. She was gentle with them, careful of her size and strength. She made them laugh with her antics, let them climb on her back. "You have built something special here," Robert said, joining David on the porch. "We built it," David corrected. "All of us. But you started it. You chose to save her when you could have walked away." David thought about that, about the choice he had made to take that egg from the destroyed nest. It had seemed like madness at the time. Maybe it had been. "She saved me too," David said quietly. "I was drowning in my trauma, waiting to die. Star gave me a reason to fight, to live." Star noticed them talking and trotted over, the children laughing as they clung to her back. She had grown to the size of a small transport vehicle now, her silver blue scales magnificent in the sunlight. She lowered her head so David could scratch behind her ears. Through their bond, he felt her contentment, her happiness, and underneath, always, the trust that he would keep her safe. That night, as David prepared for bed, Star settled beside his cabin. She was too large to fit inside anymore, but she liked to sleep close. David opened his window so they could see each other. "Good night, Star," he said. She made her humming sound, the one that meant love and safety and home. David lay down, and for the first time in 6 years, he fell asleep without dreading the nightmares. They would come, probably. His trauma was not cured, might never be fully cured, but he had learned to face it, to walk through the darkness instead of hiding from it. And he had Star. They chased each other's monsters away, just like they had promised, together.